Hey, good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome members and officers to this Overview and Scrutiny Committee and also welcome anybody watching online. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending remotely.
Good evening. Can I confirm the following members and officers joining remotely can hear us and we can hear them? Jeanette Thompson.
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. And Nigel Smith.
Yes, thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. Are there any other members or officers in attendance remotely tonight that I haven't called out? Okay. Rules of debate. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted if you request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. The normal procedure rules in respect to debate and times to speak will apply. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the result will be visible on the YouTube stream. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? I will now hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Robbie. Okay, item 1, apologies for absence. No apologies for absence have been received. Are there any further apologies that anyone's aware of? No? Okay. Item 2, minutes the 4th of February 2025. I'd like to propose that we take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 4th of February 2025. May I have a seconder? Councillor Tyson. Okay, thank you. Are there any comments on the minutes? No. Okay, in that case, we'll go to the vote, please.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Item 3, notification of other business. There is no other business. Item 4, Chair's announcements. In accordance with Council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available both on the Council's YouTube channel as well as on the Council's ModGov site alongside the documents from this meeting. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purposes of clarification, 4.8.23a of the Constitution does not apply to this meeting. Therefore, a member may leave the room during the debate and consideration of that item and be able to vote. However, please be mindful of the business on the agenda and wherever possible leave at an appropriate point in the proceedings. Members are reminded that we've adopted a scrutiny charter which outlines how we conduct scrutiny at North Herts Council, including the need for independence, initiative and integrity. It is important that all members are mindful of this and how they approach the items on the agenda tonight and at future meetings. Full details on the adopted charter can be found on the Council's intranet page for members. I've agreed to a change in the order of the agenda this evening, and agenda item 14, Ripper Annual Report, will now be taken after agenda item 7, Members' Questions. I'd also like to draw attention to the supplementary items that were published this morning in relation to item 8. Item 5, Public Participation. There is no public participation. Item 6, urgent and general exception items. 2 urgent items have been advised to me since the last meeting and approved by the Chair of the Council as urgent in accordance with the Constitution. Item 1 is the neighbourhood plan referendum for Barkway and Nut Hampstead. At Cabinet meeting on the 18th of March, there will be a report presented to consider the examiner's report and the proposed modifications to the Barkway and Nut Hampstead neighbourhood plan and to agree that officers make arrangements to conduct a referendum within the designated neighbourhood planning area. For cost efficiency and resource reasons, it's preferable to hold the referendum on the 1st of May alongside the scheduled Hertfordshire County Council elections. However, to do this, the decision must be taken as urgent and therefore not subject to call-in. The reasons for this are due to the statutory deadlines for when the information sheet and the notice of referendum must be published, which, if not considered urgent, fall within the call-in period and therefore not able to be enacted, meaning that the NPR will be held after May the 1st. The second item is local government reorganisation interim plan submission. On the 16th of December, the government published its devolution white paper, providing details of their plans for local government reorganisation to support devolving power to communities. On the 5th of February 2025, the Minister of State for Local Government and English Devolution wrote a letter to the leaders of all district and borough councils in Hertfordshire and Hertfordshire County Council, formally inviting them under Part 1 of the Local Government and Public Involvement in Health Act 2007 to submit a proposal for a single tier of local government. In doing so, it set out further detail on the criteria, guidance for the development of the proposals and the timeline for the process. This included the need for the Hertfordshire councils to submit an interim plan or plans on Friday the 21st of March 2025. This has involved and continues to involve consideration of finalising such a plan or plans by that deadline. At the Cabinet meeting on the 18th of March, there will be a report presented to consider the interim plan, developed jointly by the district, borough and county councils in Hertfordshire, and seeking a delegation to the leader or deputy in their absence to finalise and submit the interim plan by the said deadline of the 21st. Failing to meet this deadline would mean that the views of the council would not be taken into account, seriously prejudice the councils or other public interest in this matter. Therefore, this decision must be taken as an urgent decision, not subject to call-in to meet this required deadline. The formal notice for both of these urgent decisions have been published on the Council's website. Item 7, members' questions. There are no members' questions. And item 14, Isabel Alaju's to present.
Thank you, Chair. So members will note that the report before you provides an overview of our compliance with RIPA, and it highlights the minor amendments which have been made to the RIPA policy as part of its annual review. So as you'll see, the amendments are largely administrative, and they include updating officer titles, which will be further finessed following the very recent staffing restructure. There have also been refinements to ensure consistency with the latest Home Office Code of Practice, and also clarifications on the use of social media in investigations. So the purpose of bringing this report to the committee is to maintain transparency and accountability in our use of these investigatory powers. And I would invite the committee to note the report and, if they wish, to recommend the adoption of the amended policy to Cabinet. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the report? Okay, I just have one question. What training is provided to officers on this?
So officers are made aware of the updated policy, so every time it's annually reviewed, and also all the designated officers as well have training to ensure that we are working with all the third parties like SAFs and stuff like that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so thank you for the report and for presenting it. We will move to the recommendations that the committee notes the content of the report and recommends to Cabinet the adoption of the amended RIPA policy in Appendix A. I will propose, could I have a seconder, please? Yeah, Councillor Claydon, thank you. We'll move to the debate. Are there any comments to make on the debate? No, okay. In that case, we shall move to the vote.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you, and thanks again, Isabel. Okay, we'll move on to item 8, called in items. At the time of publication, one item had been accepted as a call-in under 6.3.11 of the Constitution regarding the Cabinet decision taken on 11th of February 2025 on proposed parking tariffs for 2025-26. This decision was called in by Councillors Ralph Munzer, Martin Prescott, Joe Graziano, Stephen Patmore and David Barnard. I'd like to invite these councillors to present their call-in.
Thank you very much, Chair. And could I first of all pass on apologies from Councillor Graziano and Councillor Patmore for this evening. And I just want to start off by saying that this is not my preferred way of highlighting this matter. Certainly, I was intending to bring forward an amendment to the budget, which would have outlined the Conservative proposals. Of course, in that budget debate, we proposed over £100,000 worth of savings this financial year, which would have provided the fiscal headroom in order for us to deliver this proposal. Alas, on advice, I have decided that the best option is to take this through the call-in process, and I appreciate officers and members' engagement in the forthcoming debate. But I think before we sort of look specifically at the decision of this authority, we need to have a regard to a bit of the context surrounding the challenges that businesses are facing, because during the budget that was took place in October of last year, the Chancellor announced that their national insurance contributions for employers would be increasing, and that would be resulting in a £25 billion tax on hardworking people. Now, of course, whilst this is a tax on employers, it is going to have an indirect impact, well, direct impact on employees as well, who are going to see their wages reduced. And as such, people in North Hertfordshire are going to be left with less money in their pockets in order to go and spend in our town centres, in our fantastic independent businesses of which are situated in and around our town centres. Now, this policy threatens directly economic growth and prosperity in our district. The fact is that over the last couple of years, we have seen a number of significant economic events. We've seen, first of all, the impact of the COVID pandemic, and only recently have our town centres been recovering from that impact, and footfall is getting up to post-COVID levels. Then we obviously saw the impact of the war in Ukraine and higher energy prices. And now, of course, we're going to be seeing the impact of Labour's budget during their first year in office. And it's local businesses, it's independent local businesses who are going to bear the brunt of that first and foremost. And as such, this council's decision to increase car parking charges is going to increase the pressures and the challenges they face, because not only are they going to be faced with increased national insurance contributions, not only are they going to be faced with increased business rates, increased rents, increased inflation, but now they have to contend with the impact of increased car parking charges. And whilst, you know, a 10p increase in certain car parks might not sound like an awful lot, it could be the difference for a number of people between them coming into our town centres or them not. And as such, and my colleagues are deeply concerned that this is going to have an adverse impact on those businesses. It's going to see a reduction in footfall. That's footfall that these independent businesses rely on. Many of them their products aren't available online, and as such they rely on people going into our town centres in order to actually gain that business from them. But also, this particular proposal would be that we freeze car parking charges in our town centres, in our car parks across the district, which obviously would provide those local businesses with that much needed support during this financial year, of which we're going to be seeing additional pressures as a direct result of the government's policies, but also to abolish the 30 minutes tariff in Nebworth, that thereby meaning that 30 minutes free parking would be available in the St Martin's Road car park. And that not only would be able to support Nebworth High Street and the businesses located on that road, but also it would help to alleviate the congestion pressures of which are currently seen in Nebworth on the High Street. And with the nearly 600 homes of which are proposed in and around Nebworth, which of course is going to lead to an increase in vehicular traffic, it's going to be able to prevent those issues with congestion exacerbating before they actually those issues are resulted in. So I certainly welcome the opportunity for members to debate and discuss this. This isn't obviously something which came before overview and scrutiny before the decision of which was taken, and certainly based on the political balance of this council, we of course have a Labour minority administration. I think it's important that actually colleagues from the Conservative benches and those colleagues from the Liberal Democrats have the opportunity to scrutinise and to question and to look into greater depth and detail the policies of which this minority administration are proposing, and of course propose recommendations to that. Of course, I am happy to answer any questions to clarify the position, and I look forward to colleagues discussing this.
Thank you, Councillor Munzer. I'm going to assume that your colleagues are not going to say anything at this stage. Councillor Barnard, you'd like to? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm fully in agreement with Councillor Munzer, but I'd like to come from a slightly different angle here. The new increases in car park charges and the ongoing possibility of on-street charging is a further tax on our rural communities. This is, of course, because town dwellers invariably do not need to use their cars to reach the town centre. They live within walking distance or a bicycle or whatever. Rural constituents with limited or no access to public transport must use their cars. Obviously, they're going to need to park them in the town centres. Rural shoppers are a major contributor to the lifeblood of our town centres, as Councillor Munzer has mentioned. This is an unfair financial attack on rural dwellers. Additionally, visiting shoppers from other towns and other areas may well decide to shop elsewhere and go to our greenfield big supermarkets, which have all facilities there and free parking. Evening and Sunday parking needs to be monitored, and I strongly suspect that the cost of this extra manpower will outweigh the financial benefit of the council. We have not been given any indication of the financial implications there and the balance that may well be needed to be achieved. So for that reason, I sincerely ask that this is taken back, reconsidered, and possibly withdrawn. Thank you.
Councillor Barnard, any comments? No, Councillor Prescott, or not at this stage.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd rather keep my comments for the debate, if I may. Councillors Barnard and Munzer have made the principal points I would have made anyway. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. And I should explain it's slightly irregular that the proposers of something will then get to debate and vote on it. I have taken advice on that, and it is okay to, because this would just be a recommendation and not a decision that the council is making. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the group? Councillor Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Barnard mentioned the impact on those that live in village communities over those that live in town communities. I was wondering if members had any data on the percentage or sort of proportions of those who were in our elderly or disabled or less able and mobile communities that could be impacted on this when they considered their call-in.
Just before you answer, Councillor Munzer, I'll just explain what we're going to, how this will work, because it's a procedural novelty. You've made your presentation. What we're going to do is we'll ask you some questions, as you'd expect. The officers and the executive member will then present a response to the call-in, and there'll be questions there, and then we'll move into a debate about what and where, or whether and what we want to recommend off the back of that. Okay. Yeah, would you like to respond to the question now? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dennis, for that question. And unfortunately, at this time, I don't have some hard, cold statistics for you with respect to that. But all I can say is that the impact on our elderly residents, particularly those who have reached an age of where they've either given up their license because they don't feel confident or it would be unsafe for them to do so, and as such they rely on public transport. Those elderly residents who live in our villages and are required to go into Hitchin town centre, for example, like I know many residents in Codicott and Kimpton have to, on public transport, and either to go and get the shopping, go and pick up a prescription, go to their GP. Those are the people who are very much at the forefront of our minds when making this application. And certainly, whilst I don't have that data, it's certainly from the discussions and the conversations that both myself and colleagues have had with residents in our communities, it is a real concern, particularly to those who are unable to drive or have to drive into the town centres in order to actually go and carry out those essential tasks in order to live.
Okay. Councillor Wright Mason.
Yeah, sort of in a similar vein to Councillor Dennis, you mentioned the 10p increases in a lot of these car parks might be the difference for a lot of people between coming and spending money on local businesses and not. Again, I would like to know if there's been any research or data, because yeah, be interested to know the extent of that.
That's the answer.
Thank you. Whilst I can't quote specific studies, there have been studies of which have been carried out by other local authorities and by other consultancy agencies that have proved that increasing car parking charges in town centres and anywhere for that matter is certainly a detractor. All one needs to do is look across the border in Harpenden, for example, where footfall in Harpenden town centre is significantly down and is significantly lower because of the car parking charges of which have been implemented there by St Albans City and District Council. Now, this 10p increase, yes, as I said, it might not sound like an awful lot, but to some people it could be the difference between them going into one of our town centres and them not. And as such, you know, we really want to ensure that we're supporting local businesses and we're encouraging that footfall, because as Councillor Barnard has rightly pointed out, not everyone lives in our town centres, not everyone lives within walking distance of them, and many people across our rural communities in our district are forced to drive into our town centres.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Claydon.
Thank you. Given that this is a decision that it's within Cabinet's remit to make without reference to us as a general and in general order of things, I'm just wondering if you can clarify what exactly it is that you think that Cabinet didn't take into account that they should have taken into account in the course of making that decision.
Well, thank you for that question, Councillor Caledon. Certainly what Cabinet ought to have considered when making that decision is the economic circumstances that local businesses are facing in this current climate. But also, surely as a scrutiny committee, we should have the ability to actually provide recommendations and helpful recommendations that support our communities and ensure that our communities and local businesses are thriving. And that is what the proposal before this committee it seeks to do tonight. It seeks to support Cabinet in making decisions in order to actually ensure that this authority is not a barrier to growth, but it's a organisation and an authority which seeks to support and harness it for the benefit of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Munster. I have a few questions. I'm going to ask to Councillor Barnard first. You mentioned in your presentation about extra manpower being required. What were you referring to?
If there is going to be evening charges on street charges or the evening charges in car parks.
Sorry, Councillor Barnard, I don't believe that's in the scope of the decision that we're referring to in our...
Well, you just asked me a question.
Sure, but I don't think evening charges and Sunday charges are part of the decision that we're scrutinising.
Increase car parking charges.
You referred to evening and weekend charges.
Well, if there's no charge at the evening now and you're going to implement charges, then it is an increase. Naught to something is an
I
increase.
accept that, but I don't think that was part of the scope of the decision. I don't know if we need to take some advice on. Is that correct? Yeah. So the decision that's taken was around the inflationary increase on the current tariffs, not an introduction of the evening and weekend charges. So I think that's
in which case I stand corrected and lay myself before you and apologise also for my rendition of Red River Rock.
Thank you. Okay. Next point I was going to question is Councillor Munster, in terms of freezing the town centre parking charges. Do you accept that the principle of an inflationary increase in parking charges was already debated as part of the medium-term financial strategy, which was approved by Council in September?
Well, what I would say in response to that question is that, yes, of course, it was debated and discussed at Council. That's not something that my party supported. But equally as well, since September, we have seen significant developments in terms of the economy. The economy is not performing as it certainly was projected or predicted to. We obviously had the budget, of which was delivered by Rachel Reeves on the 31st of October. That's had a significant impact on local businesses and on all of us. And as such, this is very much a decision of which we need to look in the context of those updated and new factors.
Thank you. And then on your proposal around Nebworth Parish Council, I know that in the report 8.2.2 there is already mention of conversations with Nebworth in order to do that. So I suppose you're supporting that work continuing. That'd be fair to say?
Well, I would, of course, always support that work. But what I would say in response to that is that, of course, both Nebworth Parish Council and Royston Town Council have, of course, progressed discussions with this authority. But certainly, whilst this authority has the ability and the funds in order to actually, freeze car parking charges and bear the brunt of that cost in order to actually deliver for our residents, where it has more resilience to do so as opposed to a smaller parish or town council. And I would rather the money from the parish and the town council is spent on, trying to benefit the community facilities and the community as a whole. And that actually, if this authority has the ability to do something such as free car parking charges, then certainly that should be something of which should be actively looked into and actively considered.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're going to get some kind of update on those discussions in a moment. I have one final question, and I don't see any others, so I'll ask it now. You mentioned in your call-in that you think that it would allow Cabinet the benefit of opposition members putting forward suggestions as to how the council can provide support to town centres. I didn't hear any other suggestions as part of your presentation, so I was just wondering if you'd like to put any forward now.
Well, thank you, Councillor Barnes, for that question. Certainly, these are our proposals at this current moment in time. This is what we see to be the most pressing issue and the most proactive and pragmatic way that this authority can support local business and our town centres during this current economic climate. But certainly, one of the benefits of bringing this before tonight's committee is that colleagues from across the chamber, including colleagues from the Labour Party, are able to bring forward their suggestions and their proposed policies in order to support our town centres and our businesses. Because I do note that whilst we have our town centre strategy, of which is currently in the process of being constructed, and we'll obviously hear about that later on. That is not going to be forthcoming by, I would submit, this financial year, and as such the businesses need support now as opposed to in 12 months down the line.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions, so in that case we'll move on to, I believe, who's going to present this? Is it you initially, Councillor Bryant? The Councillor Bryant substituting for Councillor Allen this evening on a number of items. Thank you for doing that. And yeah, if you'd like to go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mansett, for a view of what you describe as this economic climate, which actually has been going on for 15 years. And I was trying to think whether it was the same economic climate as last year. And given international circumstances, this isn't quite, but you do get my drift on that. What we are proposing is basically an inflationary amount, and the lowest sensible amount, 10p, because you can't go for sort of point of a pence or something like that. And so it is as minimal as possible. And what we have tried to do is to find out the effect on local business. Now, we hear a lot about the effect on local business, but as yet, we have not actually received any data on the effect of local business. In fact, I've tried to do this in Hitchin, and it is noticeable, for instance, in the papers, the Hitchin bid has not provided any figures for the effect on local business. So that still is a conundrum as to how much it is, and maybe that's something we do actually need to look at. As for the rural perspective brought by Councillor Barnard, as Councillor Barnard knows, I am one of his residents who uses public transport. And yes, it always has been a problem. I'm not sure whether this small amount is going to make a difference. So all in all, I've yet to be convinced of that. But what I'm willing to actually take forward is that we actually do some data collection on this. Can I pass over to Falstone?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just a couple of points of clarification, if I may. You are correct. This report purely deals with the existing tariffs. There is nothing in here about any proposed extension to those tariffs, and indeed that work hasn't even commenced yet. With regard to scrutiny of it, the area forums were formally consulted, and from an economic development point of view, the town centre and bid managers were formally consulted. You will see in the report at, I believe it's 8.2, 8.23, 8.24 and 8.25, the responses or no responses from the various bids. You'll also see that at the time we had a very constructive meeting with Royston Bid. They proposed an amendment to the original tariff, which officers took forward as their recommended option going forward to Cabinet, which Cabinet supported. Again, I think just picking up on something you said, Chair, if I may, we had a constructive meeting with Royston Town Council and Royston Bid this afternoon. They will be both going through their own formal processes to put forward an amount of money to continue the free after three, as they see that as a benefit. They're very supportive of the new machines and the approach with the new machines because data is key, and they need to understand that what they're funding, whether it's the town council, meets what the town council's aspirations are, and the bid, it meets what their aspirations are. And currently they're looking to working together for this forthcoming financial year, but depending on the data we provide going forward with the new machines, that may or may not be the case for future years. And Symes has also had a meeting with Nebworth Parish. They're also looking to subsidise the 30-minute tariff. If you require any more information on that, then happy to pick it up. Thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes the presentation. So thank you. Do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Claydon.
I have two questions, if I may. The first is, I was wondering whether there's any evidence from previous inflationary increases of a decrease in parking ticket sales in the periods immediately following those increases.
Ian Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. The short answer is no. I've gone back as far as 2016-17 to see what any impacts have been. Overall, any impacts on income have been because resource cement, any increase in charges imprinted late. So no ongoing impacts, just the in-year impact, the fact that charging it a bit late, so therefore there was a delay there. But in general, apart from the COVID decrease in income, which you'd expect for this particular reason, there's been no drop, there's been no shortfalls because of the inflationary increases. There have been other factors at play have in year resulted in shortfalls in income, but not due to the tariff increases, as far as we can tell. Obviously, we haven't got a complete picture about what might happen without the increases, but there's nothing in the data that suggests that.
One question. Yeah.
Just with regards to the tables of tariffs, just trying to understand, apart from areas where tariffs are being introduced or proposed to be introduced, where there weren't any, the increase is supposed to be 4%, which is 10 pence for every £2.50 of current tariff, but it looks like the increases are 10 pence across the board. So I'm just wondering how to reconcile that.
Moment. I'd like to ask Louise Symes to answer that, please.
Sorry. It would be to the nearest 10p. So we can't. Previously, we we moved away from 5p options. So it's always now moving to the nearest 10p.
Okay, do you want to follow up?
I understand that, but for example, where current tariff, for example, is looking at Bancroft standard tariff all day £5.20, 4% increase on £5.20 is more than 20p. So you would expect it to go up by 20 or 30p, whereas it actually only goes up by 10p. 10 pence is 4% of £2.50.
Do you need some more time to come back to that, or should we ask another question? Yeah. Councillor Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of Royston specific questions. So the Royston bid fed back their concerns around the impact of introducing a tariff to replace the current free after 3 p.m. issue. I was just wondering what the current, if we've got data on the current footfall, car dwell time and vacancy rate in Royston Town Centre, and if we're able to do any kind of modelling at all in respect of what introducing tariffs might have in that space. Obviously, if discussions today mean that we're no longer in a position where that might be relevant, that question slips away. But I think the wider point around Royston Town Centre's economic development stands, and I'd be keen to hear if there's any progress being made in respect of the town centre strategies in that space. The other point I think that was raised from Royston is around St Mary's Primary School and the limited parking facilities there to facilitate school pickup and drop off, and the impact the introduction of charging would have on that and congestion in the town centre. So I was just keen to know whether there's any kind of specific updates or reassurance that can be provided in those spaces.
Okay, Ian, thank you.
Yeah, I'll start if I may. With regard to the last question, I think that's uppermost in the town council's mind, which is why they're taking a proposal to provide funding to try and keep the car park available for the school. I think we recognise that the last thing that we want is antisocial parking as a result of potentially putting a tariff in there. I think, to be clear, there was previously, with regard Royston, the council did receive income both from the town council and county councillors. So although it was a zero tariff, we did actually receive income from it. A cabinet resolution a year or so ago required that officers look at a subsidy on a break-even viewpoint. Now, to get to a break-even viewpoint, you need to set a tariff so that you actually know what the break-even is. And it's to be fair to all parties as well. And with regard to data point, the new machines, the request we're making that people actually, even if it is perceived as free, so if a free tariff is introduced, and the bid are fully supportive of this because they recognise data is key, is that by asking people to tap in and tap out, gives us that data as to whether there's a decrease, an increase, a stay put on footfall, and it enables the bid and the town council to see the impact of the funds they're putting in.
Thank you. Are you ready to try to answer the previous question, or you still need more time? Okay, we'll carry on. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following on from Councillor Dennis's point, I want to specifically talk about the free after 3, which exercised an awful lot of negative feedback in the 4 parish councils that I've attended since the measures became public knowledge. It's not a question of increase, because I mean, I accept the logic and the reality of having to put charges up by a rate of inflation or thereabouts. But where you're actually introducing a charge where there was none previously, that's a different matter. Also, and I appreciate the need for data; it's vitally important. But again, touching on Councillor Bryant's point, and it's all very easy to knock previous governments, we've all done it, but the Rachel Reeves budget in October has introduced a number of factors which principally will take effect from the beginning of April, which will introduce changes that are of a complete order of magnitude different from whatever has been introduced in the past. And at the end of the day, it has to be, and there has to be an element of judgment call in the effect it will have on businesses. Now, I don't have to declare any kind of an interest because my business is not based in Royston Town Centre. However, the businesses that I come into contact with regularly through the Chamber of Commerce and other mechanisms, other networking groups or whatever, I've not heard a positive noise about the free after 3 charge being introduced. And I would very much hope the council or the cabinet would reconsider that element of the proposals. I notice it was a feature of option 1, and it's a shame they didn't actually adopt it.
Thank you, Councillor Prescott. Do you have a question? We're still in the question slot.
Really?
Not really. Okay. Well, shall we take that as your contribution to the debate that follows then? Okay. Councillor Bryant?
Can I just throw a thought in here? We're talking about 2 different things here. We're talking about the possible effects on business and whether the car parks are full or not. And the fact is that certainly in Hitchin, from 3 o'clock, in fact, all day long, our car parks are full. We're not talking about empty car parks waiting for people to come in, park and use our shops. It's a shame.
I don't have any other questions, but I think we're still waiting for an answer to Councillor Claydon's question. Okay, the Service Director, Ian Cooper, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Claydon. So I've looked into the details behind it, and I will admit, having looked back, you're correct. It is a spreadsheet error that has crept in. So the increases should be higher for those higher value tariffs than what's quoted in the report. We will obviously, in referring back to Cabinet, I guess that'll give a chance for Cabinet to consider that and whether to stick what's in the report as it is, or whether the increase should actually be even higher for those longer stay tariffs. And I'll make sure that we correct those fully for the options to be considered for the report if we refer back to Cabinet.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to allow Councillor Albert to come in as Executive Member for Finance as well on that point.
Well, two things. I mean, firstly, it's also important to say that we had the Hitchin Community Forum, which I chair, had Tom Hardy, the town centre manager, the last week. Tom raised a number of concerns about evening charging. Tom raised a number of concerns about Sunday charging, but Tom raised no concerns about the car parking increase, the actual basic car parking increase. His concerns were around Sunday and evening charging, and that's obviously another issue. I think for me, my assumption is, and I take the Mr. Cooper's point, was I was very keen, and I did take Councillor Munster's point that we didn't increase the cost of season tickets in 25-26, particularly for people who come to work in Hitchin, and I think that was a really important thing to do, an important thing to continue to do. And we've done that over several years now. But of course, my assumption is in terms of the that 10p increase on the long stay was not everybody can afford a season ticket, and some people only work 2 or 3 days a week. So actually, that was my assumption. Is it's a help to those people who work in the town but need to stay there in a car park all day. So I'm very comfortable personally with that, with those increases, or those 10p increases on the all day car parking or over 4 hours. So that's my view, but obviously I'm sure we'll take that away for a discussion at Cabinet, but that's my instant reaction. The importance of actually helping those who work in Hitchin through our no increase in season tickets, and actually just a 10p increase in all day car parking if you can't afford, or you only work coming to town 2 or 3 days a week and don't necessarily a season ticket be the best value for you.
Thank you, Councillor Albert. Are there any further questions? Councillor Prescott.
If as a result of your spreadsheet error, there is going to be an increase in income, does that mean there will be some money there available to maintain the free after three in Royston?
Ian Cooper.
Well, first of all, I'd need to obviously calculate the impact, which I can't do right now. I'd need to spend time doing that. But it wouldn't affect the principle of that any subsidy schemes should be break even. So, yeah, I'll obviously work out the impact, let Cabinet know what that is, but there's still the kind of the fundamental decision around what is the right approach for those subsidy schemes and should they be self-funding.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Munster.
Thank you. Would I just be able to ask now? Of course, I know the answer to this, but to get it out into the public domain, how much would it cost for this council to abolish the 30 minutes 3 charge in Nebworth? And then I will have a follow-up. That's in order, Chair.
Waiting for an answer on that. Would it be more appropriate to answer that following the meeting? Yeah. Okay. I think we're gonna have to take that as a follow up to the meeting. But I think you can answer.
Would I be able to? Because I can in fact tell the answer, and that is £3,000. So that is an annual cost of £3,000. That's what the Conservatives budgeted for in our proposed budget amendments that obviously we weren't able to bring forward because of the advice of which we received from legal. But could I ask this question directly to Councillor Bryant? Because Nebworth is not like the other settlements where the district council has car parks in, because it's not a town, it's a village. And it's a village that's often, unfortunately, forgotten about because of its position in the south of the district and the fact that it's a rural community. Now, this authority is cutting the number of bins that are in Nebworth. It's cutting residents' waste collections. It's imposing upon residents over 600 new homes.
Councillor, can you get to your question?
I shall, Chair. Is it not worth investing £3,000 per year to support a community and a high street to thrive in one of our rural communities?
Councillor Bryant, if you don't mind answering that.
The information I've got is that Nebworth Parish Council made no comments on the proposed tariff increases, other than to express their wish to proceed with subsidising the 30-minute parking tariff as free parking in St Martin's Road car park. So very much the ball has been in their court.
Okay, I don't think you're going to get more of an answer. So thank you. Okay, are there any further questions? No. Okay, well, in that case, we need to move into the debate. Now, there aren't actually any recommendations currently, although you did make some as part of your speech. I think, I mean, I could make some, but I think it would be appropriate for you to put forward some if that's what you would like to do. And I'd be mindful of the advice that we've got, which is obviously that we can't refer this back to council because it's considered to be consistent with the budgetary framework. We can refer it back to cabinet with consider what we want them to consider in writing. So
thank you.
If you've got something to put forward, you can, and then obviously we'll move into the debate. And if people want to amend that or whatever, then we can do that.
No, of course. And the proposals that I will be bringing forward tonight are twofold. The first is that Cabinet freeze parking charges in the financial year 25-26. And the second is that Cabinet remove, abolish, whatever phraseology you wish, the 30-minute parking charge in St Martin's Road car park, Nebworth.
Okay, do I have a seconder for that? I assume that's going to be Councillor Prescott. Yeah, Councillor Prescott.
Seconder reserve.
Thank you. Okay. Is there any debate on those proposals? I've got Councillor Bryan. What did you want to?
It's clarification. Councillor Munster, does a freeze this year mean that we'll then have to catch up next year?
I think you can answer that.
Thank you. What we would be proposing, and certainly Mr. Cooper can help in our budget proposals that we were to bring forward, that there would be a small increase post this financial year. But certainly what this measure is intended to do is intended to support local businesses who face the immediate impacts of the national insurance increase and the other measures of which have been implemented or will be faced by them on the 1st of April at the start of this new financial year. I think I'm quite clear in what I have, the answer that I provided to you.
Fine, yeah. Councillor Dennis.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. This is difficult. I'm going to try not to be political, given scrutiny is a space where we hang our coloured hats of many types up at the door before we enter the chamber. I don't think that this committee is the correct space to effectively rehash a debate that ought to have happened at a different point in the timeline or at a different meeting facilitated by this local authority. However, I think what has occurred this evening, certainly through the questioning, and I hope through continued contributions to this particular debate, is that Scrutiny has had the opportunity to play its part as a critical friend to Cabinet and the Council administration and support it in reaching robust policy decisions. I think that it is valuable that the strategy was taken to the various area forums. And I think in those spaces, members in the community were afforded some opportunity to feed into it. However, the role of scrutiny and the way that councillors interact in this space is different to how we behave in our community forums. In those spaces, we are parochial. In this space, we are not. In that space, I would look at purely matters related to Hitchin rather than district-wide views, because my role in that space is to represent my community and my residents in Hitchin. My role in this space is to scrutinise across the board and to look at the overarching work and the strategy that this council undertakes. So I think I'm not minded to support the recommendations that Councillor Munster has put forward, but would seek to propose a recommendation that this committee notes the importance of overview and scrutiny in supporting Cabinet in reaching robust policy decisions, and that it asks Cabinet to work with the Chair and the committee to effectively facilitate this work going forwards. And I think that from what we've heard tonight, while the references to the community forums has been a valuable exercise, it may have been beneficial and perhaps preempted and saved committee time and certain levels of political angst in this space as well, had this committee had the opportunity to feed in and provide its views to the policy earlier in the process rather than via this call-in process.
Okay, are you proposing an amendment to the? And I have some thoughts on that too, but
Ooh, if I propose an amendment and it's accepted, then it forms part of the substantive, and I know how Councillor Munster's strategic mind would work on this matter. So I wouldn't be moving to, if we did propose it as part of that, I would request that each recommendation is voted on separately.
Sure.
So it's up to you,
So
Chair.
But otherwise, you'd be happy to note or to have noted that the points that you've made there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. I don't have anyone else mic on, so I will respond to that. I mean, and I'm also going to put forward an amendment to the recommendations as well. So we'll get to that in a moment. I think we could have taken this at the previous overview and scrutiny committee. I think that's fair. The process, as we've heard, was quite extensive in terms of public consultation and consultation with the relevant parish and town councils and bids. I felt that was likely to be sufficient at the time, and we had quite a full agenda as it was, so that's why we didn't. But I guess we can think about that in the future. What I would like to do is, I think that we should refer this back to cabinet, so I'm going to propose that we do that. I think that given what we've heard in terms of the questioning and the responses to that questioning, I feel that I can't support freezing the parking charges because the inflationary increase has been shown not to have damaged parking ticket sales in the past, and it has is already baked into the medium-term financial strategy that will go ahead. So I would remove that consideration, and I would like to replace the one on St Martin's and Nebworth with a recommendation to reconsider the proposed off-street and on-street charging tariffs in Royston and Nebworth in light of the information that we've heard this evening. I would also like Cabinet to consider the updated modelling, which was referred to earlier on as well. So that's what I would like to put forward as an amendment to the recommendations that we've heard. So I think we need a seconder to that, if anyone's able to. Okay, Councillor Tyson, thank you.
I'm happy to second that and reserve my right to speak.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone would like to debate on that amendment. Yeah, Councillor Munster.
Forgive me. I'm conscious of the fact that there have been 3 proposed amendments, and that the debate potentially could get messy. Would it not be in order for us to debate one amendment, vote on it, and then?
I think what we've had is we've had one recommendation from yourself. We've had an aborted amendment from Councillor Dennis. I should have chosen a different turn of phrase there, sorry. But that wasn't put forward as an amendment, and now I've put forward an amendment. So we've had a recommendation and a single amendment. I think that's quite straightforward. So I think what we should do now is to debate on that amendment, vote whether we accept that amendment or not, and then proceed to the substantive vote either way, depending on whether that gets. So the amendment then becomes a substantive, yeah. But we would probably still need to vote as to whether to refer back at all. So yeah, that's how I think we should proceed. Does anyone have any contributions on the amendment then? Councillor Claydon, thank you.
I mean, I'm starting to get slightly confused too, but I support the amendment. I think what you're putting forward makes total sense to me. I think given what we've heard about the increases and whether those should actually be 10p across the board or whether they should actually be 4%, that I think that's for Cabinet to reconsider in the light of what we've heard and the financial implications of either route. I don't mean to ambush anybody by picking that, but I've only noticed that in the course of looking through the papers. I think that is potentially a relatively significant difference. In some cases, that means that the increase is 2 or 3 times as much as it would otherwise be. So I think it's appropriate for Cabinet to reconsider the recommendations in light of that, and whether they do want to increase it by 10% or 10p or by 4%. And also, yes, it makes sense for Royston to be reconsidered alongside Nebworth. So happy to support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Claydon. Councillor Munster.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the engagement that you've had with this discussion. And I do appreciate the spirit in which the amendment you have brought forward is brought, in fact. But my concern would be that with respect to the specific proposals surrounding Nebworth, that actually what that amendment does is it waters down those proposals and those recommendations, because that is quite a clear emphasis and policy action for Cabinet then to discuss and debate and then to vote on. Whereas I fear that by lumping that in with Royston, and obviously there are very different issues at play in Royston, and it's a very, very different community, that actually then that might not necessarily be helpful in delivering a good outcome for the two communities of which are involved, which you've mentioned in your amendment.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other contributions on this? Councillor Tyson?
Yeah, well, I'll be very brief because I don't think we need to go into a lengthy debate about whether 10p is a lot of money or whatever. On the subject of the Nebworth and Royston thing, I think that if we're referring this back to Cabinet to decide, we can assume that Cabinet are going to look at both of those issues in the relevant amount of depth and detail, and therefore I don't think we need to separate them out in this proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Could I request that obviously you've made two amendments in terms of the one to the car parking freeze across the district, and then of course the one relating to Nebworth and Royston, and could we take those votes separately?
You can request it and I will decline your request. Okay. Thank you, though. Okay, so what we'll do now, I didn't see any more contributions, so we'll vote on the amendment, and then if there's any further debate, we'll have the debate on that, and then we'll vote on whatever the motion is at that point. We'll come to that in a moment. Okay, let's vote on the amendment, please.
So that motion is carried.
Thank you. Okay, are there any further contributions on the debate on this item? Councillor Dennis?
Given the additional recommendations that have been introduced by the amendment, I will now say I am happy for my amendment to be included in the motion as well.
Does that need to be voted on, or? I'm a bit confused.
I'm just a bit confused as to what Councillor Dennis your amendment is. Is it just that the work programme should have been dealt with differently, in which case that's within the remit of the committee already and the chair to set their own work programme, and it was opted not to come?
It's it potentially is referencing forward to an item later on the agenda, requesting that Cabinet note the importance of overview and scrutiny and supporting Cabinet in reaching robust policy decisions, and works with the chair of the committee to effectively facilitate this. So it's adding extra import and just re-emphasising that very critical relationship between the two bodies.
Again, yeah. Then I mean, it's up to you. Yeah, it can be amended if you want to vote and debate on it, or if you're happy to accept that, then.
I'm happy to accept it. Is it my decision to do that, or is it technically Ralph's decision to do that? Yeah.
Give me, would we just be able to recap on what has been proposed? I was somewhat distracted by a colleague.
Okay, no problem. So you made the proposal. It's still your proposal, even though it's been amended. Councillor Dennis is proposing to amend that proposal further, and the question is whether you would like to accept that.
Would I just be able to clarify the wording of that proposed amendment to my proposal?
Yes. So it's the Cabinet note the importance of overview and scrutiny and supporting Cabinet in reaching robust policy decisions, and works with the chair of the committee to effectively facilitate this.
Well, Councillor Dennis, on the ball as always. So thank you. I shall indeed accept that amendment to my proposal.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Manser. Does that need to be seconded? It's not going for debate, is it? Because it's just said accepted it.
Councillor Manser would accept
Yeah.
We just, I mean, if the second Councillor Prescott's happy with that, then we
Yeah.
accept that. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Thank goodness for that. Okay. Right. Okay. In that case, I didn't see any more contributions. Does anybody have anything they want to say on twice amended? Okay, Councillor Manser.
Chair, seems as we are in sort of the debate of the main substantial motion, I would just repeat my concern as to the provisions and the policy of which I have proposed being watered down, specifically for Nebworth, and I would ask for a recorded vote.
Do that for me? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay, I don't see anybody else. I would just say I don't feel that we are watering this down. I think it's entirely consistent with what's in the report in terms of the recommendation. So I think So we'll take a vote now if there's no further comments. I think what we're voting on is the vote yes is to refer back with the considerations that we've made, and a vote no would lead to no referral being made. Is everybody happy with that? Yeah? Okay. Let's move to the vote then, please, Robbie.
That motion is also carried, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to everybody who participated in that. We will move on to item number 9, which is the planning and transport portfolio update. And again, Councillor Bryant in place of Councillor Allen to present that item. Thank you.
Can I just introduce this and pass you over to Mr. Falstone, please?
Lovely, thank you. I think to save members' time, you have a detailed report in front of you that covers the transport and planning portfolio, which sits wholly within my directorate as regulatory at the moment. Just for clarity point of view, the only kind of area that it doesn't cover is building control. That's not something that you asked about, but that does fall under my remit as well. But I've followed the chair's advice with regard to meeting, with regard to report format. If you have any questions, more than happy to answer them.
Okay. Thank you. And firstly, thank you for the detail in the report. Again, I think it's really helpful. I'm sure there's clearly a lot going on. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions as well. So Councillor Muntzer, do you want to start us off?
And could I just echo, first of all, your comments, Chair, because it is a very comprehensive report, and thank all of those who are in your directorate, Mr. Falstone, for their work as well, because this is certainly one of the directorates that has the most impact on our communities. And obviously, it's really important that we get that right, particularly in planning terms. Would I just be able to ask where the executive member is this evening?
Is that something we can ask? I don't think it's really. Sorry? Yeah, he's given his apologies. So.
And would I just be able to then follow up on that question? Because obviously, the executive, or the interim executive member, I might say, is, of course, the leader of the council. Now, this directorate is responsible for very significant matters, including planning. And of course, we've got the local plan review of which is upcoming. Can I ask whether there is any information as to when we are going to have a permanent appointee, someone who can focus solely on this portfolio, and when that is going to be brought forward?
I think that probably is a question that only Councillor Allen can answer properly, but Councillor Bryant,
I think it is, but I do know that Councillor Allen has been in conversation with the Chief Executive about the new directorates and actually lining those with the cabinet posts.
So we might expect some news at annual council or around.
Sorry?
Then. We might expect some news around annual council or something.
Yes.
Perhaps. Or, yeah.
So we are talking annual council.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? There must be some. Come on. I've got some. If not, Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is it possible to just give a quick summary statement on progress for the eastern access to Hitchin Station? I mean, I've heard snippets, but I can't actually get a clear picture on where we're at the moment. Thank you.
Louise Symes, please.
Yes, Chair. At the moment, we've undertaken consultants working with Hertfordshire County Council, where we have commissioned consultants to look at various other options to this station, which are including not only from the eastern side, but also perhaps along under the railway bridge into the station. So we've looked at various options, and at this stage we have now presented those options to Network Rail, and we're waiting on Network Rail to come back with feedback on whether some of those options are plausible or not. So at this stage, it's very much waiting for Network Rail to come back with us. They've taken their time in coming to us, and it's not through trying to encourage and sort of meet with them. It has been a bit awkward, and well, not awkward, but just time consuming. But as soon as we have a report from them, then we'll obviously be able to provide more of an update and then start to narrow down those options, which we then can look at more with more certainty in terms of taking those forward.
Okay, thank you. I've just been asked to remind members we also have Nigel Smith remotely as well, if any people have got questions in his area. So thank you. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. And I note that this is a incredibly broad and diverse portfolio that covers many areas, and there's a lot of really key projects in this space. I was just wondering, I guess I have to ask from an officer perspective, how you're able to prioritise and decide which items to take forward, especially given the limits on resource. It would have been beneficial, of course, if we had a portfolio holder present who could give us the political steer and set the political priorities for us.
Some pointing. There's no mics on.
Acting Councillor Albert to answer. I know he's had his light on.
It's not on as far as I can see.
Going to say something about the station, but not on this last
Okay.
That's beyond
Sorry,
my pay grade.
I completely missed that.
And man, we're still on the station.
Okay. Is anybody able to provide some answer to that, and then we can come back to on the station, I guess.
You're right, Councillor. It's sometimes incredibly difficult to balance what it is that we're doing, and whilst you can have the most in-depth discussions with your portfolio holder and executive members, and we regularly hold shadow briefings as well to kind of test the water, many of the things, such as, for example, the EV installations in a car park, that's bound by a government grant criteria. There is a fixed end date whereby we need to get that work done. With regard to the car park machine installation that we're doing, then it's finding the time to get that. We could have potentially installed it over Christmas, but we didn't think that was a good idea. People are focused on buying things and looking after family, as opposed to having to worry about whether they've tapped once, twice, and whether they've remembered to tap in or tap out. So hence it's going in now. So I think the short answer is we do have a project prioritisation programme. A lot of it is statutory timeframes led or grant timeframes led, and everything else is in discussion with the portfolio holder.
Thank you. Councillor Albert, did you want to come in on Hitchin Station, please?
Yeah, just to say, I think two things. There's been continuing work on this. I think this council worked closely with our former MP Bim Afalami on this, and I think it was really helpful, the meetings that he helped to bring together with the key stakeholders, and I think that's important to make that point. I think that work's now been continued by Alistair Strathern as our new MP. He had a meeting with Network Rail on last Friday to look and obviously begin to discuss some of those options that Louise Symes talked about, and indeed obviously the kind of look at some of the wider options for the site, because in reality is the trick, I think as many here will know, that if obviously we could find an alternative location for the aggregates company who currently occupy part of that site, it would actually free up a whole site for potential development, and also remove a lot of lorries going through the centre of the centre of Hitchin. So I think all of those pieces of work need to carry on doing as Louise has set out. But ultimately and it was the same issue we had with previous levelling up funding, is that the county council is responsible for transport issues. They don't have the funding for a station access project. We still need, I think, to persuade Network Rail of the importance of actually looking at the whole of the land that they occupy in Hitchin, And we need to persuade Govia Thameslink that if there is a new station access, that they have to actually staff it, which is another issue, and they were rather reluctant about previously. So there's a lot of strands of work going ahead there, and also the importance of actually how we link those with a better access from Hitchin Station into the town centre, particularly for those pedestrians and cyclists, which is pretty appalling at the moment along Wellsworth Road. So I think there's a lot of piece of work there going on, Chair, and it's really helpful that obviously Ian and Louise have been, keeping that going, working with the county council, and hopefully we can come back and bring some more information about that, to Councillor Wright and other colleagues.
Thank you, Councillor Albert. Councillor Claydon.
Thank you, Chair. Just with regards to electric vehicle charging infrastructure, I was just wondering what the council's position is on cross-pavement charging solutions for individual residents.
I'm not an expert on this at all, but I was having a conversation with Steve Cobb this afternoon, who was talking about money we have just got for the Community Safety Fund in next year's budget, part of which will be used to upgrade lampposts so that they become the newest British standards, so they can become smart lampposts. First of all, so they'll be able to use things like CCTV cameras and potentially for EV charging. But then we have problems with other outside agencies who don't want to do that. But from our point of view, we're actually putting in as much infrastructure as we can. And before Councillor said us, that costs £1,000 per day, whether it's one lamppost or lots of lampposts. So we're actually looking at getting together a long list of lampposts.
Councillor Claydon.
Thanks for the answer. And I think lamppost-based charging has an important role to play. But I was thinking more of when I talk about cross-pavement charging, I mean more where an individual resident has a charger of their own. They want to charge a car, but they don't have their own driveway, so they need a way to get the cable from their property to the road without it tripping anybody over as they walk past. So there are ways of doing this by essentially just creating a groove in the pavement so that the cable can run through. I was just wondering, I think there is quite a bit of variation across different authorities in terms of how easy that is in practice to do, in terms of how much paperwork is required, planning and so forth. So I was just wondering, how this authority is dealing with those kinds of requests.
Thank you. Ian, would you like to say that? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to say this without it appearing that as an officer I'm passing the buck to another organisation, but I am. Highways are responsible for the pavement, and I understand what you're saying about channels within the pavement and bits and pieces like that. All I can say is what we're hoping is that as a result of the council being awarded, there's the county council being awarded 6.7 million of Levi funding to look at on-street charging. Hopefully we can start to address these situations as well, because lampposts are great, but they typically tend to be within North Herts at back of pavement as opposed to front of pavement. So if they're at front of pavement, such as Liverpool springs to mind being recently there, it's nice and easy because you can park right next to it and plug yourself in. But where it's back of pavement, you've still got the potential trip hazard unless you've got some way of putting it through the pavement to some form of potentially bollard or retractable bollard or something in it. So I think what I can say is this is something we'll be looking at, because as you can probably see from within the report, we're actively engaging within the 10 districts and boroughs of Hertfordshire for our share of this 6.7 million to increase the on-street charging. And as part of that, by kind of offering our car parks up, we're hoping to increase the charging within the rural areas as well, because rural areas typically are not attractive to a private charging company because they don't see it as a high revenue stream, shall we say. So by kind of offering our car parks and offering areas like that, hopefully we can balance it out so we can do the best for the district as opposed to just the towns.
Thank you. Councillor Albert, did you want to come in on that as well?
So just to say, Chairman, I just agree with what Ian had just said. That I mean, I'd raised, and I'm sure I mean, probably my colleague, Councillor Barlow might well also have raised with the county council about exactly the sort of thing that Councillor Clayton just mentioned. But the county council at this stage were reluctant to go ahead with that sort of thing of looking at wires under the pavement and so on. That even when I had a company, I had a resident who had a company would install this for free as a trial. The county council wanted to look at what other councils were doing, like in Oxford and elsewhere, before they committed to this. If they have now funding, then hopefully maybe we can make some progress on this. Because actually, in a lot of areas of Hitchin and other towns and so on, actually having that sort of facility, John, I absolutely agree with you, is the only way we're going to make some progress on this.
Thank you. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just talk or ask a question very briefly about the town centre strategies? I'm reading through this, and I think it's a very important piece of work, and also I accept this is an enormous portfolio you're dealing with here. But I'm minded to. I recall that. Does anybody remember the old Roadrunner cartoons where you've got Wile E. Coyote setting one trap after another, and by the time the trap snaps, the Roadrunner's 20 miles down the road? And that's unfortunately the way it is between the public sector and the private sector, particularly with the smaller independent SMEs. You have to move a damn sight quicker, so that identifying a series of problems, and there's no doubt there are problems and solutions in town centres, you identify the problems and then take 2 or 3 years with your armies of consultants or whatever to come up with solutions. That problem has probably gone away by that time, and you've got a whole load of new problems. Is there any way, and I accept this is with respect to the local issues in the North Sea, but this is like trying to become a little bit more reactive as an oil tanker when it's very difficult to do that. But is there any way the council can be a little bit more reactive, if only in taking bite-sized pieces of these strategies rather than trying to fix a whole thing in one go?
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't disagree with you, Councillor Prescott. I mean, within the local plan, it did set out that there would be a stepping stone approach to the town centre strategies. I think with the potential of the Garden Square coming online within Letchworth as a potential scheme, with Churchgate coming forward, when we took the draft work that we'd done on the town centre strategies to the Strategic Planning Project Board. And for those that aren't aware, is the Strategic Planning Project Board is made up of all 3 parties. They can have 2 representatives, so it's the shadow execs. So we've got the planning exec and the environment exec, and then both shadows can be on there as well from the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. The view of the project board was that actually they wished us to take it forward as a single document. So what we're doing at the minute is we're taking it forward as a single document as a request of the cross-party project board. So we're proceeding with that as quickly as we can. Ms Symes is leading on that, whilst also putting car parking machines in, getting EV charging points and other bits and pieces that she's doing at the moment as well. But we have done some initial work, as I said, that Project Board has had. Project Board has requested to see it again before it comes forward. We've also had a number of stakeholder workshops where we've had businesses and the bids involved in the development work that we've done. So I think we are proceeding, and we're proceeding as the cross-party project board requested that we do. So hopefully we get it to you as soon as possible.
Thank you. Just on that, I understand on the forward plan, there's a draft town centre strategy that's due to come back to Cabinet before the 30th of June. Is that still on track? Because it says in the report that you're looking at getting consultants back in again to work on it. So
that is certainly the date that we're working towards.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. And are you able to provide any information on the retail evidence base that was mentioned in the report? Sorry, I should have asked you this before, really.
Yes, I mean, Project Board were presented with a detailed assessment of the retail need that will be within the new strategy. I think the best way for this committee is to probably sum it up as not as much as we thought and of a different type to what we thought. I think we can all understand that kind of post-COVID, the rise of online ordering, the size of shops. I think you've only got to walk into Boots within Letchworth to see how long the 2 checkouts have been closed, and you pay for your sandwich at the makeup till. So I think, you know, there is definitely a change out there that we need to reflect, and that's basically what it says. We've presented the evidence base to the businesses and to the bids, and they're supportive of what we're looking at.
Thank you. Councillor Peace.
Thank you. I was looking at the delivery of the LC WIP, the cycling and walking infrastructure plan, which mentions obviously the funding is primarily from grants and from section 106. I just wanted to know how the planning and the transport sides of the portfolio are making sure that the planning team are pushing that as an S106 item to developers so that that project gets the funding it needs.
Thank you. Our transport policy officer, senior transport policy officer Edward Lee, is actively involved with the master planning team and also with giving advice to development management when applications come in. So Edward is very much the link between Hertfordshire County Council and our planning control. So any recommendations that come forward, he's very keen to try and make sure that document has some weight because it's obviously part of the local plan, of the local transport plan, and that we're able to then have sort of make references to various schemes within a particular development. So we make sure that those are linked. And actually Hertfordshire County Council at the moment, what they're doing is they're actually going through the LC WIP, and they are looking and prioritising some of the more important routes. So if those are on the list, then we've got more evidence in which to sort of direct, you know, contributions towards going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Manser.
Thanks, Chair. Just to follow on really from Councillor Albert's point with respect to eastern access at Hitchin Station, because I know this seems to have been a project that has been mooted and has been talked about for years. And I'm slightly concerned and worried because Councillor Albert talked about funding, and that's something obviously that we really need to be concerned about. But there are potentially missed opportunities. You know, I understand the local sentiment surrounding the Highover Farm development, but certainly if there was a plan ready to go, we could have had section 106 funding in order to support that, support the Eastern Access being implemented. And therefore, could I ask, do we have a time frame? I know very much the ball is in Network Rail's court, but do we have an aspirational time frame as to when this is going to be delivered? Or at the very least, we have some costings and a feasible proposal to be delivered.
Councillor Albert?
I mean, I can have a go at that, and probably Mr. Forster could come in. So I think there's a few things there. I mean, first of all, there is, if I understand correctly, Section 106 money for a station access, both from the North Huts College housing scheme and potentially if Highover Farm goes ahead. The costings that the back of the envelope costings that let's be frank, the Network Rail did when we were looking at levelling up funding was potentially a project that was in excess of £10 million. And that is way more than any Section 106 money. Hence the reason why that we were looking, and I know, for example, Louise has been, you know, looking at how we can, and Edward Lee, for how we can actually, if there is further funding coming from government, whether grants or elsewhere, how we can look at a wider scheme to improve the station access more generally, not just from the eastern side, and improve access into the town centre. But I mean, but that's the issue. From the meeting I was at with Network Rail the other day, and obviously also the correspondence I'd certainly been having from Herts County Council officers, as Louise said, there is further options being looked at. I have to say that these are in some respects almost as alternatives to Eastern Access, and I still believe that the Eastern Access is the right answer to this project, which actually is also about looking what we do, as I mentioned earlier, with the aggregates yard there as well. But I mean the time frame, I think it's really difficult, Ralph, to be honest. But we need to keep, and as a council, and obviously all of us here, and continue to press for this to happen and press Network Rail. And certainly I know that that's Alistair Stratton's view that the creation of GB Rail will make a difference here, because frankly Network Rail is operating at the moment as a series of baronial empires and not talking to each other. And how they bring that together is really important. But I think we've got some good contacts now with Network Rail again, and hopefully we can actually make some progress on this in the coming months. But I mean, Ian, if you wanted to add some things to that.
Thank you, Councillor Albert. I think, if I may, I think it was around 20 million. So I think when we looked at levelling up Fund 2, and as Councillor Albert said, some detailed back of the fag packet costings, we were in excess of 20 million, and that was for a tunnel to only service the station. So at one end of the tunnel, you could access it, at the other end with the ticket machines. And this council then picked up all the revenue costs associated with the tunnel that only served the station. So that was the issue with it. Trying to work with Network Rail now, hopefully as a development partner, because they are key, because Section 106 will never free up that amount of money, particularly if we're looking at potentially an Eastern Access that serves more than just the station, actually has an opportunity to have a link through from Hitchin to Hitchin as opposed to Hitchin to a railway station. So if we can actually have something that's a proper walking, cycling route through, then without them as a development partner, hopefully freeing up the land that they have around there, I'm not quite sure where we can go from there. And, any future government grants we're clearly keeping an eye on, which is why we're progressing this work to get it to a detailed costing. But as I say, I think just reinforce, without Network Rail, it's very, very, very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. I think I wasn't going to speak on it, but I will just sort of add that it is a massive project. And I think reframing it the way that we have to look at it as part of the wider transport infrastructure for Hitchin is probably the right way to go on this. Of course, that's going to present a number of challenges for us, and hopefully we can continue to work with those partners and stakeholders and build on the relationships that we've already had moving forwards, because the railway bridge on Cambridge Road is a significant pinch point, I think, for all forms of traffic. So anything that can be done in that space and linking it through to the LC whip, which Councillor Peace mentioned, I think is really valuable work. So I fully support what officers are doing in this space, and well done for being persistent and keeping the project effectively moving, because it is something that has been largely driven by district council energy, and we've been punching above our weight in this space. Speaking about punching above our weight in spaces, I'm loath to open a can of worms, but I note on page 95 of the reports at paragraph 8.2.2D, we mentioned the ongoing considerations around a particular airport. I was just curious how much officer time has been spent since the DCO was submitted on the ongoing additional considerations in respect of Luton Airport, and if we are ensuring that we're not spreading our officer resource too thinly, because I think prior to the DCO submission, there was a lot of officer resource in that space, which may have taken away from the delivery of other projects. Have we refocused, and have we got our priorities straight with what we're able to effect change on?
Thank you. Yeah, you are quite right. It was, for those members that may not be aware, the Luton Airport expansion was what's known as an NSIP application. So it's a project of national significance. Therefore, it's dealt with by the Planning Inspectorate. So as one of the host authorities where the airport directly affects land within North Herts, we were fully involved in the consultee, and members at Cabinet will have been tired by myself asking for additional money all the time to get consultants and everything else. I think to directly answer your question, There was some ongoing work when post it being given to the planning inspectorate. There were some more questions coming out of the planning inspectorate. When the planning inspectorate then passed its recommendation to the Secretary of State, there were more questions coming over. And I know this is veneer, but I'm going to touch it anyway. For the last few months, it's been quiet. And I'm hoping that the 3rd of April won't be moved again. That's not to say you'll know that I'll put a couple of bids in, because post the decision, let's say it's a positive decision as far as the airport is concerned, there will be more ongoing works for the council, because we'll need to get fully involved in how the airport has a series of what they call a green infrastructure growth plan, i.e. what there is a series of thresholds. So if traffic meets a certain threshold, if noise meets a certain threshold, then action has to be taken by the airport. There's an active monitoring needs to be done of what the airport is doing when it should be doing it. And if it isn't doing it, they need to be taken to task. So there will be ongoing work for us post this decision. At this point in time, until we see the decision, until we see what the conditions are attached to that, we just have to sit and wait, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Tyson.
Thank you. Just a couple of general questions about the future. Starting off with the 5-year land supply, which has always intrigued me. Now, obviously, with the latest iteration of the MPPF, we're in a reasonably uncomfortable situation now, because we've only got 3.9 years. Is there any possibility of ever catching up? And what would we have to do in, I was going to say in concrete terms, that's probably not a very good turn of phrase, specifically in order to achieve that, if it's possible at all?
If I may, Chair, rugby pass to Nigel Smith online.
Yeah. Nigel, are you able to answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Without sugarcoating, it's going to be very difficult to get to that position, as Councillor Tyson's alluded to. The requirements in the latest MPPF require North Herts to deliver, give or take, 1,000 homes a year, and our long-term average in this district is about 300, 350. So obviously the current local plan starts taking steps towards that. We've had a number of the master plans and the large sites come through full council. They're starting to now come through planning control committee, but essentially until you get 2 or 3 of those on stream and delivering at the same time, it's going to be difficult for this authority to kind of show that consistent forward supply. I think it's fair to say that is a common challenge across a lot of authorities. It's not something where sort of North Herts is falling behind in its inability to demonstrate that supply.
Thank you. I think Councillor Tyson's got a few follow-ups. So.
Yeah, just on that, even something like the Baldock expansion wouldn't make a massive impact then, because we just have to take each section of that as it's developed separately, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, that's correct. Obviously, a scheme like Baldock will deliver in overall terms a very large number of homes, but equally it will deliver them over a sort of 10, 15-year period. So when you divide that obviously down into 5-year chunks, you're only ever looking at having perhaps 800 or 1,000 of those homes kind of in your pipeline at any one time.
Thank you. Did you have another question?
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Tyson.
Yeah, just one. Got 2 more. I'll try and perhaps I'll put it all into one. But as far as the local plan review and the local development scheme are concerned, are we on target with the deadlines that we've set ourselves for those? And then the final question I had was about the sort of more of a sort of speculative question about the future of the planning department in a unitary situation. What happens to local plans if we form a unitary administration with other districts or boroughs?
Ian, you ever take this?
If I may, Chair, perhaps Nigel for the first part and I'll pick up the second part.
That's fine. Yeah. Nigel, are you happy to answer the first question?
Sorry, could you remind me of the first part of the question? I got fixated on the second.
Whether we're on track, whether we're on track with the local plan review.
Are we on target?
That was it. Thank you. Yes, LDS timetables. Yes, we are broadly speaking on track for that. Obviously, as per the report that came to Cabinet, a lot of that is contingent on government regulations and updates coming out in time. So obviously we've had a new bill published today, which doesn't directly affect it, but we have had announcements around further consultation on the NPPF, for example, in the spring, which will start setting national development management policies, which we're not allowed to then replicate in our local plan. So ideally, we need sight of those and to know what they contain before we can commit to what then goes in our local plan. So from our perspective, from an officer point of view, yes, we're on track, but we're a bit at the whim of other parties in the government in particular.
Okay, thank you. And did you want to comment on the second question, or?
If I may, I think just on devolution, I think if I take a protective stance first, I think what you've picked up on the 5-year land supply, it's critical that we push ahead, because what we don't want to do is get in a position where we have a local plan, but actually we're still dealing with what I would term hostile applications, planning by appeal. So I don't think it's an option to sit and wait. We have to press against to protect the district, in my view. What happens come Devo, come 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever the magic number is of unitary authorities for Hertfordshire? I think the only thing I can really say is if you look at Buckinghamshire, which has been a unitary for a number of years, they're still operating on more than one local plan. So I think it will be whatever the format is, be it 2 authorities, 3 authorities or whatever, we'll all come in with our local plan, and then it will be somehow trying to get them to align so that we can get a single stream going forward.
Could presumably
Could
take a number of years. Yeah, how do you finish it? I'm going to ask a couple of questions now, and then I'll come to Councillor Munster, who's also got his lights on. I did have some questions about the slightly peculiar situation in Royston where residents are being asked to tap in and there's no charge, but you've already answered those earlier, so I won't answer that. I asked a question earlier about how much is being spent on agency staff that's mentioned in the report. So it'd be good for you to answer that, I think, both from existing budgets and under PPAs. And I think just as a follow-up, and fine if you can't answer this, but to what extent is the increase in the budget for resourcing within this department likely to have an impact on that in the future, if at all? And I've got one other question, but I'll let you answer that first.
Okay, thank you. So for members that may not be aware, we have a thing called a PPA. Now that's a planning performance agreement. Basically, whilst the fees are going up on the 1st of April for a planning application, they are not cost neutral. We will not break even on our planning fees. So what we do is, to assist large scale or complex schemes, we will enter into an agreement with the applicant whereby they will fund 100% of our costs to deal with that application. So currently we have 2 agency staff that are fully employed under planning performance agreements, and so far this year you're talking about 135k. Now that is not 135k of council taxpayers' money, that is 135k of developers' money to progress their scheme. So for those of you that may recall full council, you will have seen Hyas helping us out on some applications. That's a consultant under a PPA. You will have seen potentially Peter Bull or Justin, other agencies that we have. With regard to other agency staff where we've been unable to recruit, so for example, Ms. Symes, with regard her town centre planning officer, I've lost track. I'm not sure if we've been out 4 or 5 times now, to be honest with you, to try and recruit to that post. So to progress that, as Councillor Prescott said, to actually progress that and move forward, the only thing we can do is bring agency in. And Mr. Smith as well, I've lost track of the number of times he's been out for a senior planning policy officer as well. I think that must be 4 or 5 times at least. So the bad news on that is we're talking about 175k, but what I can say is that is within existing budgets. So where we have vacancies or whatever, Mr. Cooper will be aware I like to kind of put money into little pots so that I can do this without it affecting the general fund. So that was that. And I think with regard to growth items, number of those growth items that we put in the budget, I believe that's what you're referring to, yeah, is that we have 2 officers within Nigel's team that are on 5-year contracts, so they will be going soon, bearing in mind that the timetable for the local plan review has been agreed by Cabinet and we need to press on with that. They were made permanent as part of the budget proposals. We've already heard that Edward Lee, as our transport officer, has kind of taken the LSWIP forward. He's also fully involved in the master planning. You'll have seen him sitting in this seat at the last master plan that we brought towards you. So fortunately, I put a bid in for another transport officer to support him, also to bring the EV charging forward on the Levi Fund and assist in all of that. So I think all I can say, Councillor Barnes, is that the proposals I've put forward is to enable work to be delivered and taken forward.
Thank you. My other question was about EV charging, but I think you just addressed it, so I'll move on from that. Thank you. Councillor Munter.
Thanks, Chair. Could I just first of all remark and follow up from what Councillor Dennis said with respect to Luton Airport? Certainly the communities that I represent and those in the southern rural part of the district are waiting with a sense of dread after seeing the government's direction of travel with respect to airport expansion. And all I would ask is that, you know, members across the district, but particularly those in the southern rural, are kept abreast of what this council's response is post the decision date of the DCO. But could I then circle back on to Section 106 funding? As you know, we are in the process of establishing, well, we have already established a task and finish group that looks into developer contributions. And with the local plan review that's taking place, could I ask, depending on the recommendations of which are born out of that report, how do you see that task and finish group and its findings linking up and informing the local plan review?
I think Councillor Munster is, until we've firmed up the terms of reference of the review and what outcomes you're looking for, and then also being mindful of government policy going forward as to where they're looking at going forward with planning obligations, that's a crystal ball, and I would rather not go there with a crystal ball.
Fair enough. It depends. Okay. Are there any other questions? No. Okay. Well, thank you for the very detailed information you provided again. We'll move through to the recommendation, which in this case is that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the report and appendices. I will propose that. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Tyson, thank you.
Yeah, happy to second.
Okay, we'll move into debates. Anybody have any debate contributions to make? Councillor Lancer.
Thank you. And look, I'm sure that we will raise this at the next meeting of full council, but could I just put on the record my thanks to you, Mr. Fullstone, for your 35 years of service to this authority. I think it's an absolutely extraordinary story, and I hope you don't mind me sharing, you know, going from an apprentice to the deputy managing director and the service director. I think that's something of which, you know, it really aspires younger colleagues at this authority. So thank you very much and enjoy your well-earned retirement.
Thank you, Councillor Manser. Any other debate comments to make? No. Okay, and I of course echo those sentiments as well. Right, let's move to the vote then, please, Rob.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you very much, and yeah, thanks again to the officers, including Nigel online, for their support this evening. Mindful of time, I think what we'll do is we'll do item 10, which is exclusion of press and public, and then take a short break whilst that's arranged, if that's okay with everybody. So item 10, exclusion of press and public. I propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the said Act as amended. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Claydon, thank you. Let's vote on that.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, so we'll have a short break now whilst we wait for IT to move us into private session. I think if we come back in, say 5 minutes, is that enough time? Thank you. So back in part one public session. Before we continue, just there has been belated apologies received from Councillor Bartois. So if we could minute that, please, at the appropriate point. Okay, item 12, museum storage part one. Councillors Val Bryant and Ian Albert in place of Councillor Thomas to present, please.
Right, thank you. In November, we presented a detailed options appraisal demonstrating the urgent need for improved storage conditions to properly care for the North Herts Museum collection. Following this, officers were tasked with exploring viable options, one being the acquisition of a suitable property for storage. Unit 1, City Park, has come to the market and offers unique advantages. It is a 25-year-old open plan warehouse with office space, located in the main commercial area of Letchworth Garden City. Officers obtained a favourable pre-purchase report from Brown and Lee surveyors, and a full building survey from Hollis confirmed the building's fair condition. Officers have submitted a condition offer for Unit 1, subject to committee approval, which has been accepted. Significant investment will be required to equip the facility with the desired internal environmental stability to preserve our much valued museum collection and to ensure it's environmentally sustainable and efficient. The property, sold under a long leasehold with an existing tenancy to City Sprint UK Limited until January 2026, allows the council to receive rent during this period. The tenant is responsible for repairs, maintenance and business rates, giving officers time to plan the conversion. The proposal presents a unique opportunity to secure long-term museum storage at reduced financial commitment compared to alternatives. It also allows the sale of the current storage site at Berrymead Road, Hitchin, potentially securing £500,000 and alleviating storage pressures at Broadway Gardens in Letchworth. I endorse this report and will pass over to the Executive Member for Finance and IT, Councillor Ian Albert, for a brief financial overview.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Val. And you can see it clearly takes two councillors to replace Councillor Thomas. And obviously she can't be with us this evening, but obviously particular thanks to Tamsin for her work on this project, and obviously thanks to our officer colleagues. We've got Phil Doggett and Rob Orchard here this evening, and obviously there's the legal team been working on it. It's been a huge amount of time and effort put into what I think is a really excellent paper, following on the options paper we looked at, but and you looked at back in the autumn. Officers' conditional offer for Unit 1 City Park has been made and is subject to approval. We discussed in part 2. Due to the building's nature, significant investment is required to equip the facility for museum storage. Alongside fit-out costs, removal costs and appropriate taxes, the total purchase and fit-out costs amount to 2.5 million, well within the capital programme's 4 million earmarked for museum storage. This outlay is spread over the asset's life, with an annual net revenue impact of just under £200,000, less than any of the long-term solutions previously presented to the committee back in November. The property is under a long leasehold, 150 years with 125 remaining, with an existing tenancy until January 2026, providing us with £64,000 per annum in rent. This allows time to develop a detailed conversion plan. Efforts will also be made to improve the facility's environmental efficiency, and even if the council alters its course, the property has broader market appeal, offering other ways to recoup the investment. Whilst officers have continued exploring the other options previously presented, it's likely that these would represent more costly solutions than the proposal in front of you today. Facilities of this size and type do not come to market very often, and therefore I agree with officers that the possibility of acquiring this asset and converting it is a very attractive option. The acquisition of this facility will also pave the way for the onward sale or rental of the current site at Berrymead Road, which would facilitate a capital receipt or annual income to the council. Chair, I know there's some questions that you specifically asked that I'd just like to sort of touch on. The first one was around a requirement to get multiple quotes for the fit out and how that process is handled. This aspect would be undertaken in accordance with the council's contract procurement rules. This provides for the need to obtain quotes and tender as appropriate. The detail for how this is best managed will be agreed as part of the project and taking appropriate external advice. Are other options still being pursued in case this doesn't work out? If the purchase is not agreed or does not complete for any reason, we hope that won't be the case, the other options then will continue to be explored. I think Councillor Tyson raised about grant funding in the part 2 item, and it's probably appropriate just to touch on this now, Chair. Officers have engaged with grant funding organisations further, with the consensus being that there needs to be a single defined option to develop further in terms of a grant towards construction or major works. In the case of Unit 1, grant funding towards the acquisition has not been pursued, partly because of the timeframes for securing the building on the market doesn't accommodate the grant funding timescales for this scale of financial support, and partly because a grant towards a leasehold building of relatively modern build is extremely unlikely to be successful. The VISO that we have received is that a grant towards the relocation of the museum collection, involving the community in the process and having a demonstrable impact on people's lives, is far more likely to favourably meet the criteria of some of the grants available. Officers are also exploring the use of grant funding towards project staff should that acquisition go ahead. And finally, Chair, it's probably also worth just touching on in terms of the partnership solution. That was the solution modelled back in November, is still currently being explored by the Letchworth Garden City Heritage Foundation, who have sought our input for a grant towards a feasibility study over Vantage Point, also in Letchworth. We're waiting to hear the outcome of this bid. Work to develop a finalised proposal and then to remodel this building will take a number of years. Doesn't definitely have a guarantee of viability, and the initial projections for this solution modelled within the November report also show this as costing 137,000 more per year over the life of the asset, over and above the cost of the solution put in front of members today. But clearly, if that solution is developed of being more economically viable, we then have the market appeal of Unit 1 would potentially give us some flexibility to revisit this in the future. Hopefully, Chair, that's helpful in terms of asking your and other councillors questions. We obviously have officers here to answer any further questions or comments from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Albert, and also for summarising some of the discussion in part 2 in a way that we can discuss. Does anybody have any questions at the moment? Look like you might. Okay. Councillor Clayton.
Is there any direct income foreseen being coming in from the building in terms of events or something that may be run there? Is there the possibility of it raising some income?
Yes, there is the possibility of exploring income. I think those decisions over whether and to what extent we wish to commercialise that offering still need to be taken. I'm sure the members of the committee can appreciate that this property coming to market is a recent development, and we would need time to work up exactly what we can offer. I think suffice it to say that any alterations we were looking to make would make the building accessible. It comes with a great deal of office space and welfare facilities that we would look to certainly allow the building to pivot to not just be a storage facility like we have at the moment, but to actually open the doors, provide behind the scenes tours, perhaps conservation workshops with members of the community, along with any bespoke offerings that people might look to arrange for their families and friends. So there are certainly offers that we can look to offer and to what extent we commercialise those remains to be seen. I think off the back of that, that income stream is likely to be nominal in the grand scheme of things with this project, it must be said. Nevertheless, no income has been factored into the proposals put to you, so that should indicate that the figures in front of you are a worst case scenario, and there should be some upside if we can tap into some of that income, if that's any reassurance.
Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, I mean, and thanks, Rob, for that response. And I think what's the really exciting thing about this, I mean, this project, is that actually that this will make our extensive archives available to the public in the way that just hasn't been the case. I'm sure that Councillor Bryant will want to to comment on that in more detail. And the chance of whether it's schools or local history groups, the community, being able to do those things that Rob has mentioned, behind the scenes tours, now finally becomes a possibility in the way that Berrymead Road sadly was just never able to do. But I know, Councillor Bright, you have particular interest in this area.
Thank you. I think we can give a lot of social value by moving to this unit, because there'll be space for a classroom or a work area. So all sorts of activities can take place. It also includes a large car park, which I counted fitted at least 30 cars. So again, we've got flexibility outside. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have. Oh, Rob, did you want to come in? Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I just thought it might also be worth adding and pointing out that the location of this facility is, of course, in Letchworth, where the museum service, since moving to North Herts Museum in Hitchin and having the site at Berrymead Road, is a presence in Letchworth that we haven't had. So I think there are benefits to point out there in terms of spreading the service across the district. It is, of course, a district-wide museum service, and I know colleagues are enthused about that opportunity.
Thank you. We heard in part 2 that there's some contingency built into the storage space. Has there anything been explored in terms of leasing that space on a short-term basis or anything like that?
So I'll let the officers go first.
Yeah.
I'll probably allow Phil to comment on what we could do in that regard, but I think we can't overlook the security concerns around how the building is designed and the layout and the works that we're about to do, and who would then be going in and having access to our collection, or certainly close by to it. So I think anything like that would require careful thought. Whether we could seek to use any surplus space until and if it becomes utilised for museum storage for wider council storage is something that we'd certainly look to consider. We need to make sure that anything being introduced to the space is not having the potential to introduce pests and things that might have a detrimental impact on our collection. But I'm sure those sensitivities could be explored in due course. And Phil, I don't know whether you want to comment onto the commercial possibilities of that, putting those concerns aside.
That on. Yeah. Sorry. I don't think I can add any more than Rob has said. It's not something we've actively considered actually to this point, but I think Rob's points that it would be challenging to co-locate with a commercial user, I think, in that facility. But I do think other services utilising some of that space is an option possibly in the future.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the services or local voluntary organisations.
Voluntary organisations,
Yeah.
so that's perhaps it's more for Rob whether
Yeah, I appreciate the security.
we can
concerns
explore
with a
that further. Yeah,
private partner, but yeah. Okay, Councillor Bryant.
I would like to emphasise the fact that the North Herts collection has got many different kinds of objects in it with different needs in terms of temperature and storage, which take up space. Also, we expect the collection to grow, particularly with a growing bulldog, with the archaeology excavations will have to take place there. You may or may not know the fact that we are famous that in fact the bulldog cremations are worldwide famous because they give the bones for ancient DNA for Roman and Iron Age people, which allows archaeologists and scientists to actually pinpoint their lineage, their families, and where they've travelled. So at the moment, we're actually state of the art, and so we need to build on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryan. I'd like to ask Councillor Albert. We know there's going to be a procurement exercise for this. Obviously, we're being asked to note the detailed budget cost plan, but that's subject to change as part of that procurement exercise. Would it be prudent, in your view, for Cabinet to reconsider that once it's been completed? I'm slightly wary of signing this off on the basis of the estimates that we've got without further work being done to kind of establish exactly what is going to be given. And we've talked about lots of different options in terms of community benefit, and there's those haven't been explored as part of this report because of the timescale. That's fine, but I'm just wondering whether that, in your view, it would be appropriate for Cabinet to reconsider that at a later point when it's more known. Because my inclination is that it would be.
Cabinet clearly, because this will form an important part of the council delivery plan. So council would need, I think, to keep this under review. I guess one of the questions we haven't discussed yet is in terms of actually doing this. What is a major piece of work? There clearly probably need to be some sort of project board set up to do that. I think it's probably something that I don't know whether Mr. Roach would like to call, Mr. Cooper like to comment, but that would seem to me the appropriate way forward in setting that project board up, and then clearly that would form part of Cabinet's considerations. That project board does its work on the fit out and that quite major project that going forward. But obviously colleagues wanted to comment on that. That would be.
Yeah, we can address it through the framework for project management, and that would tend to mean for larger projects there'd be member involvement in the project board, usually exec member plus one other would usually be involved. And I think given the size in terms of capital of this project, probably would be a large project, so we'd go for that route.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mansell.
Thanks, Chair. I know that previously we have had an issue at this authority with project management. So following the train of thought that you have, Chair, can I ask what measures are going to be implemented in order to ensure that this project is delivered on time and on budget and the costs don't spiral out of control?
Who would like to?
I seem to remember that in the autumn we discussed project management, didn't we? And that it was agreed that all projects would actually have a recognised project manager and a project management structure, and that this project would follow that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Just check I don't have any more. 1 second. No, I think Councillor Albert answered them all, so thank you. Right, let's move to the recommendations, which are that the Overview and Scrutiny recommend that Cabinet approve the acquisition of Unit 1 City Park, Letchworth Garden City, on the terms set out in the Part 2 report, and noting the detailed budget cost plan for adapting, fitting out, and upgrading the building for museum storage. I can propose that. Could I have a seconder, please? Yeah, Councillor Winchester, thank you. Is there any debate to be had on it? No. Okay. Do I want to say anything? I don't have to, do I? No. I think all what we've heard is encouraging. I think that it would be prudent, as I mentioned, to consider the refurbishment work once more is known about that. But I'm reassured, I think, that we can handle that through the council delivery plan process that we have. And obviously we could call that into our work program if we wanted to assess those plans. So I think I can leave that alone. I also I think it is important that we continue to explore the grant funding towards the refurbishment or the relocation of the project costs. I think that's important that Cabinet take that on board. But again, I don't think I need a recommendation to say that. I think it'd be good to have that considered when you look at this next week. So that's what I was going to say. I was thinking about amending the recommendations along those lines, but I don't think that I will at this point. Councillor Munster, do you want to?
I mean, Chair, I'm of a similar mind. I'm not sure it necessarily crosses the threshold where we need to propose an amendment, but I think certainly, the officers are in the room, the executive members are in the room, so they will have heard the comments of overview and scrutiny. It's really welcome. So thank you, Councillor Bryant, for confirming, obviously, that there will be a project manager, and hopefully that individual will be identified in good time. But overall, this seems like a very good and cost-effective solution. It certainly is welcome that actually, we are getting to grips with this, because it does seem that, administrations of all colours have kicked the can down the road, shall we say. So I'm very happy to support this and look forward to keeping it under review.
Thank you, Councillor Munster. Yeah. The only other thing I was going to say before I interrupted myself with Councillor Munster is, I agree, it's time for us to get on with this. I do have concerns that we need to make sure it's done right in terms of the refurbishment, and that's the angle that I'm pushing, really. But yeah, okay, I didn't see any other contributions, so let's go to the vote, please, Robbie.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to everybody for your contributions on that tonight and for the excellent work on this so far. Okay. And also to Councillor Thomas as well, who isn't here but has done a lot of work on this herself. I know. Before we move on, I should mention that. Right. Let's move on to item 13, the Corporate Peer Challenge Report and Action Plan. And we, again, don't have Councillor Allen this evening, but Anthony Roach will present, unless you're going to say anything, Val. No? Okay. Thank you, Anthony.
Ian and Val may want to sort of help field queries, but if I introduce it and then we'll go from there. So members will recall we had our Corporate Peer Challenge at the beginning of November. The final report was received immediately before Christmas, which meant from a timing perspective, we weren't able to bring it to your January scrutiny committee, but it instead went to the Cabinet meeting in the middle of January for noting, with then a delegation to produce the action plan, which is what is in front of you tonight. So the action plan is going to Cabinet next week for adoption, and this is your opportunity to both discuss the underlying report, but also the action plan that relates to it. You will see that in the report there were 10 recommendations. We agreed with the executive that the action plan would just respond to those 10 recommendations, wouldn't look to pick up any of the other themes emerging, but obviously where there was useful information within the report, we have looked to capture that and take that on board. I don't propose to say too much more, just a couple of other additional points to make. Some of the recommendations were quite narrative in nature, and you will see that in response, some of the actions on the plan are also quite narrative in nature. The intention is that as we work through the response and get a greater level of specific detail behind that, we will populate the update column with those specifics, which will then also allow more specific timescales against those actions. So I absolutely recognise that there is an element that it's sort of quite high level still at the moment, with references to ongoing or from the start of the new civic year. So as we progress the actions, we will look to drill down into that detail and keep the action plan updated as we go along. The other point to mention, Councillor Barnes, you asked me to cover this point. Recommendation 1 talks about the golden thread. So just for those members that aren't aware, it's a phrase that's used in local government to essentially describe the link between your overarching corporate policies, in our case, the council plan being the top one, and how that links through to the operational delivery on the ground. So if you think that there should be a consistent thread running through from the council plan, through our financial strategies, the council delivery plan, the service plans, and then into individual teams' plans and the individual actions that people are tasked with through their regular performance reviews and one-to-ones, you should ultimately be able to see a link from those, actions that have been taken by the individual officers back to your overarching corporate plan. So that's what's meant by that golden thread. I think I'll probably leave it there, particularly given time of night, but more than happy to field questions or suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Abbott or Bryant, do you have anything to add? No? Okay, cool. Councillor Manser.
Thank you. I think everyone in this room would agree that the biggest challenge that is posed to this authority is funding and the financial position. And therefore, would you be able to go into a little bit more detail as to how we are going to meet this challenge? Because the corporate peer challenge report obviously mentions that effectively, difficult decisions are going to have to be taken in the medium to long term. And as such, how do you feel that this action plan delivers on that?
Thank you. Interesting question. And I'm tempted to say that in the medium to long term, we may not exist, given if you think about the timing of it, the corporate peer challenge took place before the publication of the devolution white paper, and that has subsequently moved the goalposts. And one of the things that we need to wrestle with as we work through the action plan and follow through on those recommendations is, I'll use the place narrative example, which was one of the recommendations, was develop that we have a place narrative, but we've not invested a great deal of time and money in really pushing it. And one of the recommendations from the Corporate Peer Challenge was we should do that. But actually, if North Herts doesn't exist in 3 years' time, is that really a priority for now? And it's that sort of thing that we need to think about. There's recommendations in there around workforce. Again, if we were doing a 10-year workforce strategy versus a 3-year workforce strategy, they're potentially looking at different things. In terms of sort of the general point you made, we do talk in the recommendations about prioritization, and that is something that the leadership team and cabinet will be working on collectively to agree those overarching priorities as we sort of move into the start of the new civic year and update service plans and things like that. So, we have to accept that we don't have the money or the staff resource to do everything that we would like to do. And by that, I mean both on the officer and the member side, because, it's often viewed that members have all these ambitions and officers are just sat there saying no. Well, actually, that's far from the case, because none of the officers got into local government to sit here and say no to members. Ultimately, we all want to deliver for the community as well, in exactly the same way. So there will have to be compromise, there will have to be trade-off, there will have to be prioritization, and we will need to think about how that all fits against that devolution white paper landscape.
Councillor Bryan, did you want to come in on that?
Thank you. One thing we can do, if you look at item number 9 on the plan, is modernisation, is the digital transformation initiative, which we've already started, and we are doing really well compared to other authorities. And we have got a good team which are looking at aspects of the work within the District Council and making them more efficient So, for instance, this week, on SharePoint, it talks about the new app which is being developed for Careline and dealing with those queries. And we can actually save an awful lot of money by focusing on the digital transformation.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, I know the comment on page 208 of the report, which talks about how the delivery plan should be developed by the staff and not simply be a document produced in a top-down fashion by senior management. So in light of that comment, I'm just wondering what steps are being planned to ensure that the delivery plan has wide ownership across the council and is fully embedded in working practices.
Ian may wish to comment because he's literally just put on the hub the staff action plan, and that includes those sorts of things. So, short version, we always try to engage with the senior managers, who in turn engage with their staff. We cover it at staff briefings. Going back to that golden thread comment, we would expect those things to be picked up in one-to-ones and regular performance reviews, and that's how you get that engagement. And it's very much about a two-way conversation. But Ian, not sure if you want to add anything.
Yeah, there are aspects within the peer review plan that also mirror findings we found from the staff survey we carried out, and we've now got to develop an action plan which we did in consultation with staff. So we did the survey, then did lots of consultation with staff and senior managers and all through the organisation to come up with the action plan. We've now published that for staff. We've raised it in a staff briefing recently, so hopefully we'll embed all of those bits through that process as well.
Thank you. I'm just going to return something that you mentioned in the question that I asked in advance. I think this is a good action plan. It is narrative, as you described. I'm a bit concerned as in order to hold people to account to the action plan, how we do that in its current form because of the nature of the timescales that have been put on, which are primarily either ongoing or say a start date or say a season. What are the steps, and you've acknowledged that and I appreciate that. What are the steps that are going to be taken to develop this in more detail into something that is specific and measurable? Because again, one of the recommendations in the report was that we should set smart objectives for this stuff.
Thank you. And I'll just add one other thing about the golden thread that I forgot to mention earlier. Because we had a by-election in October, the new council plan was literally only published the week before the corporate peer challenge. Therefore, it probably wasn't surprising that they found it hadn't been fully embedded. So in terms of picking up on that point, my recollection from our last peer review in 2020 was we brought the action plan back to scrutiny roughly every 6 months. So if that's something you're interested in doing, I'm happy to volunteer that. And then obviously you can see what the progress has been. Hopefully you will see progress as we drill down some of the detail. I think why there is some commentary around start of new civic year and things like that is earlier in the meeting you heard about the ongoing discussions about potential alignment of executive member areas with the new leadership team structure and when that may or may not be in place. And part of this is linked to that. If there are going to be new executive members or responsibilities are moving around, and clearly I wait for the leaders to tell me what the outcome of that is going to be, it makes sense to involve those new executives in developing some of that response.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure thank you for that update. I think that's something we could consider on the work programme. And then I just wanted to go back to the place narrative that you mentioned earlier. Obviously, this action plan still suggests that would be pursued subject to available funding. Is that still what you're proposing to do? That might be more of a political question than one for you, but it doesn't seem the best use of resources from a prioritization point of view at this point.
So it does need a conversation with the administration as to where it sits in that prioritization. We did look at potentially using the UK Shared Prosperity funding that we've got for next year. One of the ideas was whether some of that could be spent on promoting the place narrative. That was on the long list. It hasn't made the short list, which is going to Cabinet next week, for Cabinet to sort of agree the principles of where that funding might be allocated. And I then think we're going to then delegate the detail of those allocations. But within some of the economic development work and specifically promoting tourism, there may be a small element of using the place narrative and some funding linked to that. But I think in terms of, a really big push on it as its own thing, I don't sense much appetite for that for obvious reasons at the moment. So I think it will just be tied into what we'll be doing in the short term. But Val may wish.
Yeah, Councillor Bryant.
Unfortunately, I think that the place narrative has been overtaken by events. And as Anthony said, we need to look at which aspects of it we need to actually run with now, and that other parts of it are actually possibly going to be about another place rather than North Herts District Council.
Okay, I mean, in that case, I might suggest that next week Cabinet consider changing that part of the action plan to reflect what you've just talked about. But I'll leave that with you. Does anybody have any more questions? Councillor Winchester.
I guess I'm just coming back to this fact that we've got an action plan that we can't really scrutinise because it's, everything's up in the air, and a future that's all up in the air. So we can't really hold it to account on that anyway. So I kind of, why is this here and why are we looking at it? Because it doesn't feel like it's actually going to inform anything other than sort of internal management procedures.
It's a great challenge. So the semi-facetious answer is that the Local Government Association require us to develop and publish an action plan within 3 months of the publication of the report. So we are fulfilling that objective. What I will say, though, is that I think there is stuff in there that is useful to us in the short term. So we might not do everything against all 10 actions. In fact, I suspect we probably won't do all, everything against all 10 recommendations. But there is stuff in there that will help us in the short term. And there is stuff in there like the digital transformation project that Councillor Bryant mentioned that actually will help position the council for whatever comes next. Because, using that example of the digital transformation project and future local government reorganisation, you could take the view, well, what's the point? We might as well abandon it and we'll just stick with our current systems for the next few years and make the most, make the best of it. Or you can take the view that actually, if we modernise our systems and processes, actually we put our services in the best possible situation for transfer to whatever future unitary models it's going to be. So I take the latter view. That's not to say it wouldn't be valid to take the former view. So I think there are things in there that are still absolutely relevant. But yes, query, the place narrative is the obvious one where it's probably not worth spending a huge amount of time on. The one caveat I would say is it doesn't look like the government is going to change its mind on reorganisation. But if they did, it wouldn't be the first government that's gone heavy on reorganisation and then not seen it through. But we wait and see. For the moment, we have to work on the assumption that North Herts Council is still going to be here. But obviously balance that versus what looks like is going to happen.
You may, yeah.
It was just a suggestion that perhaps you could indicate the things you think you will do and things you won't do. Maybe a priority, maybe a reg rating or some kind of something that just kind of gives us a sense that these aren't all equal and that you have different priorities. Thank you.
Happy to work on that with the administration as we develop up the more specific updates. So yeah, absolutely take that on board.
That makes sense. Councillor Bryan, did you want to comment as well?
Thank you. I think you've also got to think in terms of the whole council. In less than the last year, we have had a new council plan. We've had the council, we've had the review and this action plan, and it is very much a collegiate thing with the officers and the councillors, where we're all going in the same, we're going in the same direction, and keep the work. I'll say the workers, the officers. They want to have, they have pride in what they're doing and want to actually improve standards. And when you look at each part, or most parts of these, actually, individually, they make sense and they make things better and make working here a better place to be, which I think is going to be a challenge as the next couple of years goes on.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. So we will move to the recommendations, which are that the content of the Corporate Peer Challenge report and its recommendations be noted, and that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee comment on the proposed action plan to be considered by Cabinet on the 18th of March 2025. I'm happy to propose that. For a second, please. Yeah, Councillor Tyson, thank you. Is there any debate? Councillor Munster.
Thank you, Chair. And I think this action plan and the Corporate Peer Challenge report is actually something to be strongly welcomed, because it's really important that as an organisation, this authority is looking at best practice within the industry and what we're doing well and what we can do better. And certainly this report has identified both. And it would be irresponsible for us to discharge our responsibilities prior to any reorganisation taking place. And I know from conversations with Councillor Albert, I hope he doesn't mind me saying that, we both are very much of the view that actually until such a time as to when this authority is abolished, we are the custodians of it, and we are in need to ensure that we discharge our duties as such. But with respect to the action plan and the report as a whole, I think it could be summarised in 2 words, and that's pressures and prioritisation. We all understand the pressures that we're under. I'm sure that that's something of which, well, I know from conversations with senior management, that's something they understand, and certainly it's something I hope that individuals of whom are lower down the hierarchy understand as well. But it's really important that they do understand that, but equally that it is not something that is consistently highlighted, because I think that actually otherwise it could prevent people from actually doing their best work, and it could prevent them from actually sort of focusing on what matters, and that is delivery of those essential services. Now, something which is to be strongly welcomed is the digital transformation. That has the potential to generate a number of savings and efficiencies to this authority, and that's going to be crucial as we move forward in the coming years. And certainly when I was arrived here earlier on, I did arrive a little bit earlier, and I sort of walked around the building and I asked some junior staff, how does digital transformation impact on your job and your directorate? And actually, I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised with the response of which I was given by those members of staff. They do understand the benefits that digital transformation can bring to their job and to their directorate, but that's something that we need to ensure is maintained, that actually these high-level strategic policies are not just something that councillors and senior management are dealing with. It flows down the hierarchy. It's certainly welcome that we're going to see in-person staff briefings. I think that's really important to actually ensure that as an organisation, everyone is on the same page, and that, from the chief executive to the most junior employee here, that actually, they understand what this council is here to do and what this council seeks to achieve. And what I would say, and I know that Councillor Albert and Councillor Bryant will take this back, we do need to see with respect to the structures of leadership, not just in terms of officers, but in terms of political structure. We need some certainty with that. And hopefully in the coming weeks, we will see a permanent executive member for planning and transport appointed, because it is a really crucial time within that directorate, and it requires someone of whom is able to focus their full and undivided attention to that, because otherwise I fear that we're not going to be able to harness the opportunities and deal with the challenges of which that proposes. But I'm very happy with this, and I look forward to seeing how it's implemented in the organisation.
Thank you, Councillor Munzer. I will only echo what you just said. I think particularly on the digital transformation, that's why I was keen that we considered it at the last meeting. On your final point, I also happen to agree, and I know that Councillor Brown does too. Are there any other contributions? No. Okay. Then let's vote.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you. So that moves us on to our final item, which is, and I should say thank you again for the work on this, Anthony. Our final item, overview and scrutiny work programme. Jeevan Mann to present.
The work programme has been compiled following conversations with the Chair and the Vice Chair and includes the annual reports, items from the forward plan and possible items for scrutiny as in Appendix A. Any suggested topics for the work programme or task and finish group will be greatly appreciated. Can be raised in this meeting or to the Chair, Vice Chair, or by emailing the Scrutiny Officer mailbox, and I'll begin to investigate them. Members will be invited to a work programme training session on Tuesday, 13th of May. This will include training from the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny, as well as a workshop with myself and James to begin looking at items for the work programme for civic year 25-26. Section 106. Members have been appointed for the task and finish group. The draft scope has been reviewed between the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny and the Chair of the task and finish group. The draft scope has been sent to officers for information and has been shared with the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny to ensure that the scope is well defined. Comments are due back from officers on Tuesday, 18th of March. An initial meeting will be arranged and held with members of the task and finish group at the earliest opportunity. LGA peer review. The LGA peer review actions are now included as Appendix C to this report, so that members can review and the progress of actions. Decisions and monitoring tracker. There were no referrals or recommendations made to Cabinet at the last ONS meeting on Tuesday, 4th of February. Referrals will be made to Cabinet at the next meeting as a result of the call-in recommendations on Tuesday, 18th of March. Centre of Governance and Scrutiny. James and I will be attending the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny conference next week, Thursday. We'll feed back to you following that. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jeevan. Are there any questions? Or we can take some. We can be fairly open in the debate anyway. That's fine. Right, I'll just read the recommendations and then we can make any comments on the plans. 2.1, that the committee prioritises topics for inclusion in the work programme attached to Appendix A and where appropriate determines the high-level form and timing of scrutiny input. 2.2, that the committee, having considered the most recent iteration of the forward plan as attached to Appendix B, suggests a list of items to be considered at its meetings in the coming civic year. And 2.3, that the corporate peer challenge action plan as attached to Appendix C be considered. I'll propose. Could I have a seconder, please? Yeah, Councillor Mansell, thank you. Does anyone have any comments they'd like to make? Councillor Mansell.
Thank you. Just briefly on the Section 106 Task and Finish Group, I think, can I just thank you, Chair, for your engagement, and of course, Jeevan and all of the other officers for the work that they've been doing so far. Thank you to those members of whom have engaged with the process, and hopefully we will be making progress on that over the coming months so that we're able to have a report of which is able to then sort of form part of and filter into the local plan review.
Thank you, Councillor Mansell. And I'm conscious that it's late, but I would like a little bit of input from members on 2 items on the forward plan for June. Mindful that I don't want to prejudice the work programming session that Jeevan talked about, but I think probably we need to agree what's going to happen in June because it'll be too short timed. Yeah. Okay. So if we could get some input on that. There are 2 items on the forward plan that I think might be of interest. One of them is the sustainability strategy, and the other one is the town centres strategy that we talked about earlier. It's a bit of an open floor if anyone's got any thoughts on whether both or either of those. Councillor Dennis, do you want to?
I certainly agree about the town centre strategy. I think that is really important to sort of keep an eye on how it's developing. The one note of caution that I have in that space is obviously Mr. Falstone has assured us that it will be ready to come forward at that point in time, but it might be worthwhile just liaising across the piece and ensuring that we're supporting officer colleagues in that space and that they're not under any undue pressure to present something in this forum that might not be ready if there is slippage.
Thank you. Does anyone have any thoughts about sustainability strategy? Sorry. Okay. Not hearing great appetite for that one. Councillor Peace, yeah.
Have we not got a consultation on sustainability open at the moment? So would it not make sense to discuss that once the results of those are received? I don't know when the closing date is. That's the.
So potentially.
So they should be included.
Keep that under review. Yeah. The other thing I was going to suggest was that we bring forward the item on the impact of council tax reduction scheme. We had a bit of a discussion about that at council in February, or rather Councillor Albert presented. That's something that I'd quite like us to look at. So if we do have scope on the agenda, I'd be quite keen to put that forward. But if more important things come in, or more urgent things come in, I should say, I'd be happy for that to be deferred. But in the absence of that, I think we could look at that. Councillor Manser.
Just with respect to the sustainability strategy, please forgive my ignorance, but do we still have the Cabinet Panel on the Environment? And as such, would it be appropriate for us to potentially seek their views on the sustainability strategy? Seems as they are very much focused on environmental matters, and they're more likely to be dealing with this and sort of be au fait with it, as opposed to this committee.
I think we could do that. Yeah, we could ask them for some information. I'll have to take that with the officers, I think, and just work out how feasible that is.
Yeah, I think that should be doable. Obviously, they have their own work program that's sort of set by officers, and it's co-chaired by 2 exec members. But also, just to highlight that any member is welcome to attend the Cabinet Panel on the Environment, whether or not you're a member. The only difference be you wouldn't be able to vote on any recommendations made or the minute approvals. But yeah, any member is more than welcome to attend Cabinet Panel on the Environment.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm not too familiar with the workings of that Cabinet Panel, so that in itself might be something that's worth us looking at. Okay, I also think that given what we've heard tonight, we should pencil in the town centre strategy for June. I think we should add a potential update on museum storage and the corporate peer challenge action plan to the future items to be scheduled and to be discussed in that May workshop as well. Yeah. Does anyone have any other comments? No. Okay, in that case, we'll move to the vote on the recommendations as read out.
That motion is carried, Chair.
Thank you. So, yeah, that brings the meeting to a close. This is the final meeting of the civic year, so I'd like to thank all of you for your contributions this evening. So we might not all carry on with this next year, but it's been great to have you all as part of the committee. The only other thing I'm going to say is happy birthday to Ralph for tomorrow morning, because we didn't quite make it, but which I thought we would at one point. We're all glad that we didn't. So yeah, thank you very much. Okay, yeah, thanks everybody, and happy election.